Alchemy, a word many recognize, yet few understand. When you hear the word alchemy, what do you think of? Maybe magic, or transmuting lead into gold? The quest for immortal life, or the philosopher's stone perhaps? Though some of this does accurately reflect some aspects of alchemy, it by no means grasps the true nature of the ancient discipline. In fact, it may surprise you to learn that alchemy is a precursor to chemistry, among other things. To understand how this esoteric form of study transformed into chemistry, we must first discuss what alchemy truly is, on today's episode of Mysterious History. Alchemy is believed to have first begun in ancient Egypt, and though the etymology of the word is disputed, one belief that experts have is that alchemy derives from the Greek name chemia, an alternate name for Egypt meaning land of the black earth. Though alchemy also played a prominent role in India and China, the influence of alchemy in the Western and Islamic worlds are what will be focused on for the duration. Alchemy is a complex array of different areas and interests of study, but what all forms of it have in common is that it is a natural philosophy, a way of studying the way things are naturally and ontologically. In general terms, alchemists wished to better understand the world around them, and thus devoted their time to studying and experimenting with the composition of their surroundings. Though this knowledge of the natural world was certainly something worth pursuing, this was seldom the only motivation for alchemists to conduct their experiments, research, and observations. Alchemists often wished to enact their will upon nature in one way or another. So-called chymists sought to transmute base metals into noble metals, most notably gold. Other alchemists wished to create the mythical elixir of life, which would grant immortality, or to discover cure-all remedies known as panaceas. Universal solvents known as alkahest or azofs were also sought after, as a substance that could dissolve anything would be invaluable to the experimentation of an alchemist. This leads us to the most important object of desire in an alchemist's heart. Known by many monikers, the Bird of Hermes, the Red Lion, the Celestial Ruby. Yes, indeed, the Philosopher's Stone. The Stone of Legend was believed by alchemists to hold extraordinary power over nature, though the philosophers were not in consensus on exactly what it did. All of the previously stated goals were believed by different practitioners of alchemy to be possible through this mythical Philosopher's Stone. The only real agreement alchemists had on the Philosopher's Stone was that it was red. Why would alchemists believe the stone of immense power would be red? Well, the answer may lie in one of the main concepts of European alchemy. Magnum opus, meaning the great work in Latin, is a common phrase in the modern day, though we use it to refer to a piece of art or a creation, particularly in praise of it or its creator. The term had a different connotation centuries ago when it was used by alchemists. The alchemical magnum opus was the process of creating the coveted Philosopher's Stone by working with what was known as the prima materia, or essential substances. Though the process was very different between individual alchemists, one of the most shared in common was the adherence to 3 or 4 stages which represented the transcendence of matter into something worthy of being the Philosopher's Stone. The first of these stages, negrito, was the stage of decomposition and is related to the color black. The second is albedo and focuses on the purification of the matter. The color for albedo is white. The third stage, which is sometimes excluded, is citrinitis and is seen as a more metaphorical or metaphysical form of transformation relating to transmutation or lunar astrology, and is related to the color yellow. The final stage is known as rubedo, which signaled the conclusion of the magnum opus process, and thus giving way to the Philosopher's Stone. Rubedo is related to the color red, and thus this is where the idea of the stone itself being red likely comes from. Despite many alchemists believing the Philosopher's Stone to be a real item that could one day be achieved, this was not the view of everyone who practiced alchemy. For some, studying the natural world was only a pretense, or an aspect of their full quest for knowledge. The Philosopher's Stone, then, was not a universal solvent or the key to immortality, but a symbol of something intangible. The stone to some, especially Christian alchemists, was a symbol of spiritual purity or transcendence. As alchemists strive to obtain the unobtainable, discoveries of new elements, substances, and chemical compounds were bound to occur. Many substances, such as nitric and sulfuric acid, were discovered in the pursuit of something higher. The famous Islamic scholar and alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan, also known as Gebir in Europe, was a man who lived through the 8th century AD. Though he is most well known for his influential alchemical texts, he had also invented several processes and alchemy apparatus that ultimately revolutionized alchemy as a whole. Of these, some of the most notable is the retort, a tool still used today in chemistry labs across the world. Jabir also perfected many of the alchemical processes, such as sublimation, distillation, and amalgamation. In addition to setting the stage for what would eventually become chemistry, alchemy also gave rise to the proto-science of modern medicine. Perhaps one of the most famous European alchemists, Theophrastus von Hohenheim, better known by his pseudonym Paracelsus, made large strides in the realm of medicine by studying the effects of poison. In fact, Paracelsus coined the phrase, "the dose makes the poison," coming to the conclusion that some things poisonous to humans can offer medicinal benefits in small enough dosages. Because of this, Paracelsus is regarded as the father of toxicology. In general, the discoveries and experiments done by alchemists also led synthetic chemicals gradually being adopted for medical use, gradually replacing the reliance on herbal remedies. By the 1700s, alchemy had seemed to reach its height of popularity in terms of practice. Many scholars and scientists in the 18th century were practicing alchemy, notably such as Sir Isaac Newton, who seemed particularly interested in obtaining or discovering the Philosopher's Stone, among other things. However, this was the beginning of the end for alchemy, in terms of its popular acceptance in Western civilization. The Enlightenment, a period of increasing rethought and empiricism, had also begun to take root at this time, and since the 16th century, the early conceptions of science had begun to shape themselves as well. Though precursors to the scientific method existed long before the 1600s, the method as we know it today came about under the culmination of ideas and methods formed under Sir Francis Bacon, Descartes, and Galileo. Alchemists were secretive and often wrote books with their recipes and findings, shrouded in codes, cryptic metaphors, and esoteric symbolism. Alchemy was also seen as taboo by the Catholic Church, despite many Christians and even saints partaking in its natural philosophy over the centuries. Because of these reasons, and also the want of the men of science at the time, who wished for the chemistry aspects of alchemy to be separated from its more esoteric and mystical aspects, the two practices began to distinguish themselves through the century. This also, in turn, pushed alchemy away from popularity, and soon it was seen as superstition and unscientific. It is through the paradigm shift of the 17th and 18th centuries that alchemy finally fell from its popular practice, and it joined the other natural philosophies in giving way for the rise of the sciences. Though alchemy was not a proper science, it still made invaluable contributions to the advancement of Western civilization. Alchemy, for its benefits, has been rewarded with mockery and contempt, despite it being the science of its times. Without alchemy, chemistry, modern medicine, and perhaps science as a whole would be very different, if even around. The contributions of alchemy to modern science could best be surmised in Sir Isaac Newton's famous words, "If I had seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." The next time you hear the word alchemy, perhaps think not about witches around a cauldron, but of 16th century doctors aiming to cure diseases through the study of chemicals and substances. Think of how the Philosopher's Stone was more than just a fairy tale object, and represented the transcendence that is pursuing hidden knowledge. Think of it as a proto-science, not a pseudoscience.